there's always that one situation is going to trigger another. And again, there's been a repetition in the number of transformer fires that have happened.
Safety has to come first. A reactor like this never should have been built amidst so many people. It's the only reactor within 50 miles of so many millions of people.
That, of course, Governor Cuomo and Senator Schumer, they're voicing concerns about Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant in Buchanan, New York. Now, a transformer fire Saturday caused the plant operator Entergy to shut one of the reactors down. Entergy does say all the reactors are, quote, safe and secure, but the fire, it caused thousands of gallons of oil to spill into the Hudson River. Crews, they're on the scene again today doing cleanup. Now, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they have flagged Indian Point for a litany of safety and security violations over the years. In fact, at one point it was red flagged and had the worst safety record of any nuclear plant in the country, but that was more than a decade ago. But for anyone who remembers, one of the arcs of September 11th was those hijacked jets. One of them flew directly over the plant. And the NRC concerned that the reactors couldn't withstand a direct hit, for example, from a jetliner. And the lack of viable evacuation plans makes things even more untenable. 20 million people live within 50 miles of this power plant. And it makes it the most densely populated area near a nuclear power plant in the entire country. And listen, anybody who lives in the area knows on a normal day, traffic jams could be epic. Imagine what would happen during an emergency. Now, despite all of that, the plant has managed to stay open and make good money over the years. Right now, Entergy is trying to relicense the reactors so the place can continue to operate. Governor Cuomo, many other local leaders, they have wanted the place shuttered for years. And after the Fukushima disaster, there was a renewed push to close the place, but the other side says closing a plant that supplies about a quarter of the power to Westchester and New York City would cause a spike in prices. There is some debate about just how much that is. Listen, I've talked about this issue the better part of a decade. We went in the field. We spoke to school bus drivers. We asked them what the evacuation route was. Nobody knew. They didn't know protocols. We checked that when they tried to do drills for evacuation, it never would work. All that said, you know, you find this conflict, which is we want clean energy in this country. Nuclear energy cleaner than if you're using coal or other alternative energies and the like, but this trade-off that's been there. Now, there's been a growing debate, which is, has it reached the tipping point where, because of other costs, they're not making as much money, they're not going to fight as hard to keep this place open? I'm talking about Entergy. You know, Andrew, it's interesting. It used to be just environmentalists against the operator. Now you have lawmakers. I mean, you had the congresswoman whose district includes this, Nita Lowey, saying, shut the thing down. You've had other folks as well. The county executive is for it. But I'd say more often than not, especially statewide figures, they've said pull the plug on this, its time has come and gone.
Well, but there's another aspect to the story and to the debate that is worth mentioning, which is that this debate about the merits of keeping Indian Point open, whether it's energy concerns or safety concerns or environmental concerns or whatever the case may be, there's no venue for actually having this debate in a place where it makes sense. You mentioned that they're in the process of relicensing. One of the two reactors has passed its license date. The other one, I think, goes through the end of this year.
Yep.
And they're actively seeking to relicense for another 20 years. The NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is the one that makes the final call on this, which, by the way, is populated with people from the nuclear industry, does not take public interest into account. It does not take the debate as to whether people in the area want the plant there as part of its determination for whether it gets relicensed or not. It is all based on their own safety findings and some other procedural findings and upgrades and things like that.
And just to amplify the point, they're in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. To Andrew's thing, if you go through who's on the board or whatever, they're all people from the nuclear industry. 100% of New Yorkers could sign a referendum tomorrow saying they don't want it. The governor of the state, the attorney general, the entire congressional delegation, name every elected official here, right? The entire state legislature. It wouldn't matter. They don't take a vote. And the concern is if they shut it down here, Jeannie, then they'll be NIMBY in other places. So for precedent, they don't want to do it. But you know, I'm sorry, after Fukushima, remember the whole conversations? It's on a fault line, act of Mother Nature, terroristic threat here, a meltdown at the plant, there was a problem. nobody can give me a viable explanation where the people would go to get to safety. I still haven't heard that yet.
Yeah, and probably all of us, or most of us, live within this 50-mile radius, and it is a scary proposition. And that's why I think what Andrew said is so important, because, you know, as you heard Senator Schumer say, the number one issue should be safety. And people should, at the very least, as Andrew said, have a voice in this discussion. And I think that's what's so frustrating about this. And, you know, my fear is that nothing's going to happen. They're going to be relicensed. They're going to go ahead until and unless there is some kind of crisis of, you know, hopefully not, but of the size that you mentioned. And then people will say, you know, well, not people, that the government will say, oh, you know, well, we should have shut it down before.
And Dom, it's not like you can flip a switch. It's 10 years to take to decommission a plant. They got to take all the spent fuel rods and everything else from the plant and bring them up to Yucca Mountain up in Nevada, I think. But the point is, this is the clock at some point. If you're ever going to do anything, it's got to start. It just keep, like Andrew said, they don't get the renewal. What do? They just keep operating the thing. December, as he said, is when they're supposed to have I think it's IP2. If they don't get the renewal at that point, they'll just keep on operating here.
Well, guess what? I don't think for political reasons that clock is ever going to start. In terms of, I think we're going to hear a million excuses. And as you just clearly articulated, it's going to continue. Every now and then, I don't know about the rest of you, but you mentioned it, Professor, when I'm watching television, the emergency broadcast system will come on, and I get a little scared because I'm like, is something going on at the nuclear, because I live within the zone. And to your point and the professor's point, I don't know a single person that can tell you what we're supposed to do in the event of an emergency. As you point out, all of our local roads will be completely flooded with cars and emergency vehicles, and it's a disaster waiting to happen.
And none of us want to, Jonathan, like I remember the iodine pills? Were they safe enough to take, right?
Yeah.
And then the question of, well, wait, do those sirens work? Do they not work here? Then you have all the safety problems and the guys that were, so the litany of problems. And I got to tell you, Entergy is a much better operator than the prior operator, right? But that said, nobody can make this place where it was built. We're showing shots here from the water, by the way. We did a piece, you could take boats right up to the thing. I mean, I just don't know how it's tenable. That's my only point.
Well, you need to all come together and decide that we're closing it on X date and then build a plan out to ensure that it happens. But as you said, currently right now, emergency preparedness and potassium iodide and other types of measures need to be taken, but the public needs to be made aware. I bet you if we did a poll and you were on the show next week, I mean, most people wouldn't even realize that they get their power, some part of their power source, from a nuclear power plant, because most people don't even realize that it's up there and there, you know?
And they don't know where Buchanan is until all of a sudden they realize, wait, it's not that far.
But, you know, it's not as easy as just bringing everybody to the table and figuring out, hey, let's close this thing. Entergy has the right to operate the plant, and there's nothing that New York State can do to stop them. There's some licensing issues with water quality, but they're going to figure out a way to get past that. They certainly have at every point in the past. As we mentioned, there's nothing with the NRC that seems like it would stop the relicensing process.
But to your point, though, Andrew, that was one thing that the governor, our friend Mr. Brodsky, and others thought is literally you could shut off the water to the plant, and then what do they do? And that would be one way to kind of, in a back way, to shut them down.
But a few months ago, they got a judge to sign off on that coastal plan that New York State thought they had as a cudgel to hold over Indian Point. So that problem seems to have been removed from Indian Point's path to relicensing, or to at least to keep operating. And I've talked to a lot of people from the industry, as have you. In theory, it's a very positive thing if it operates well. It's cleaner energy. It doesn't pollute the same way, at least in theory it shouldn't. It's similar to the fracking debate, which is it provides you relatively low-cost energy, which is something that we all need, with relatively few problems, unless.
Yeah.
It's just that the unless is so enormous, unless there is a massive problem that is
and by the way,
on a catastrophic scale.
They're not insured. You can't insure a nuclear power plant. So God forbid there's a problem, nobody will underwrite what it would cost for 50 million people to be displaced in a 20-mile area, okay? So just chew on that for a while. And after Fukushima, some of the same people who said, you know, you got to get out by 20 miles, all of a sudden they made it 10 miles and 5 miles. There's so much that goes into
And it's
this.
not only an accident, it's also, as you mentioned, the threat of terrorism, which is fairly high in the United States domestically today. And, you know, that's something that's just not talked about a lot in terms of Indian Point, but it's an absolute possibility.
Then an emergency preparedness awareness campaign, you know, so people are aware of what to do in the event of a nuclear
Jonathan, what I'm
emergency.
worried
That's
about
what
is
need to
if
happen.
people started asking questions, all right, how the heck am I supposed to go on 287 or 684 to
You
this credit?
couldn't,
You
yeah.
can't. It's a parking lot. There's no way you can
You
get
can't even
people
go
out.
on a good day.
I interviewed bus drivers, and we said, well, do you know what you're supposed to do? And some of them said to our face, if all of a sudden I hear a problem, I'm going to get my kid. But think about it. It's human nature, too. What do you do if it's the middle of school day? Everybody thinks on a Saturday or Sunday, but in real life, what happens in rush hour? We got a problem. How would it ever work? Anyway, we want you to get involved in our conversation. Head over to Facebook and Twitter and sound off on a question tonight. Should Indian Point be closed, or do you take the opposite position and say that it's vital here for our market? All right, coming up next, everyone, Chris Christie's poll numbers, they keep plummeting. First, Bridgegate. Now it's luxury Boxgate. We're going to run out of gates here. 85 grand using to entertain people at sporting events, raising more than a few eyebrows. And now, believe it or not, he's less popular than Bob Menendez, even though the senator is facing federal corruption indictments here. We'll be right back.